The internet, YouTube, whatever, is not unlike a library. It's a horribly mismanaged, confusing library, but a library. A library where the Dewey Decimal System has on the same shelf basketball highlights and 9/11 conspiracy videos right next to each other. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's organized, and that organization comes from this amorphous blob of this algorithm that reigns above us all. Organization is attempted in the library of the internet, but gone is our ability to browse unimpeded, without some library aide coming to us and saying, "I see you bought anti-dust spray on Amazon. Can I interest you in the grapes of wrath?" To browse unimpeded is to discover rewardingly. It's to find things that you found on your own and have that enjoyment of being like, this guy only has 10,000 subscribers? This artist only has 100 followers on Twitter? That is amazing, and I love that. So what I've done is I found a couple of creators that I think absolutely deserve to be found in the library of the internet. And I asked them to do the exact same thing I've done, to write about videos, artists, webcomics, anything that they found on the internet, and talk about the enjoyment of that discovery, the beauty and content that needs to be seen. I love it. I know you guys love it. And so please welcome me and the creators on this video into the Meta Micro Essay Mixtape Vol.3.
When I was a little kid, my favourite TV show was Funhouse. Every week, 4 lucky contestants would use their bodies and brains to play a host of wild variety games. Things like go-karts around the studio, dodgeball, all leading up to the titular Funhouse. This monolithic obstacle course, where each sector was its own unique challenge. Those lucky enough to get into the Funhouse then had the chance to win some pretty fabulous prizes. 90s staples like hi-fi systems, Sega Mega Drives, sports bags. I often don't have nostalgia for this era of television, but there is a soft spot for these grand, compartmentalised game shows. Things like Gladiators and The Crystal Maze. No formal competition will require one person excel in upper body strength, general knowledge, and puzzle solving. Yet there was a time in the early 90s where that was the case. It's perhaps why I have a fondness for Arcade Pit. For the past 5 years, Arcade Pit has been a weekly game show broadcast on YouTube, and I emphasise game show. Arcade Pit is the modern day Nick Arcade, or more appropriately, Games Master. 4 lucky contestants take on challenges built around video games, either knowledge checks of franchise trivia, soundtracks, iconography, or the playing of them. Simply, it's not enough to just be good at playing video games on Arcade Pit. You have to remember little details of their plots, sounds they make, or even better, be able to recognise them when they're crudely recreated in Microsoft Paint. Outside of a few one-off events, Arcade Pit's selection of games all come from the vibrant 2D era of consoles. Things like the Game Boy Advance, the Nintendo Entertainment System, and the Sega Mega Drive. This limitation is a perfect fit for its already nostalgic premise. These would be the kind of games people would be playing head-to-head in an early 90s TV production. It just so happens that, nearly 3 decades later, they're a perfect fit for low-latency web broadcasting, and pick-up-and-play simplicity. What makes Arcade Pit work outside of its excellent premise is its production values. Year on year, the host and programmers behind Arcade Pit have improved the format with new games and graphical flourishes. Yet, despite all its advancements, there's an undeniable charm to Arcade Pit due to its creative problem solving. Smite, the creator of Arcade Pit, is very much the heart of the project. Maybe best known as a speedrunner for Rogue Legacy, he is of the era of early Let's Players who found their home in the Something Awful forums. The name Arcade Pit in particular comes from his own series of videos called ROM Pit, a term borrowed from Something Awful. In fact, many guests of Arcade Pit come from those circles. Proton John, Ty Tuesday, even the godfather of LPs himself, Slow Beef. The people who made do with unregistered Hypercam 2 and headset microphones, before the era of MCNs and content houses. Some of these people even come before the era of YouTube, back in the days of Blip TV and the LP archive. These somewhat familiar names add comfort to an already comfy premise. They're games you recognise, played by voices you recognised in a format you recognise. The great compartmentalised game show, except these rounds are powered by NES games and game culture ephemera. Arcade Pit could very easily bask in its nostalgic premise, yet year on year it continues to improve. Its guests become more diverse, as do the challenges Smite throws at them. In a better world, Arcade Pit would be the best known game show on the platform. Eventually it could be. The premise for this series of micro-essays was to celebrate other channels or creators, in particular things that may inspire you. The premise of Arcade Pit isn't something I want to emulate in my own videos, but its craftsmanship and ingenuity is something to applaud. But it's in how Arcade Pit manages to recreate the splendour of the 90s game show as something that could be broadcast across Twitch that, I think, is something to celebrate.
There is a profound and immense beauty to be found in animator Umami's interface. The series follows a pair of characters who, in some way, have been isolated from the world as they embark on a contemplative journey. My description of the series is incredibly vague, but that's primarily because I'm avoiding spoilers at all costs. However, this is very much a journey worth following. The episodes of Interface are incredibly short, lasting around 5 minutes apiece, an incredibly brief amount of time in which to tell a story. When time is so limited, every second is valuable, and everything must justify its role to be worthy of inclusion. Umami fills those seconds with many things, but one thing I've come to appreciate is how there are these moments where it steps back from its characters and plot, and simply gives the viewer time to gawk at the absolutely gorgeous, impressionistic landscape filled with vibrant, striking colors and serene tranquility. Aside from simply being gorgeous, these quiet moments invite a mood of somber reflection and contemplation. Interface's world is just as important of a character as the characters themselves. There are strange forces at play in Interface. There is this bizarre cerebral static that manifested itself in the world, an ominous robotics company with a god robot, an aggressively pink shape-shifting abomination, and other strange entities. Each of these entities invite a whole host of questions, sometimes of the literal variety concerning how these entities work in this universe, but more importantly, they each raise philosophical questions about life, the universe, art, our achievements, our failures, and the things that make us human. One of the really interesting things about how Interface handles its storytelling is that it's extraordinarily restrained in how it delivers its message. Throughout the series, there really isn't that much dialogue, but what little there is put to excellent use. The characters might not say a lot, but the characters say a lot. And this style of writing pairs well with the contemplative and reflective mood established by the somber music and quiet landscape shots. Instead of relying exclusively on words to communicate with the audience, Interface takes advantage of the fact that it's a visual medium to tell its story. In fact, the main character of the series never utters a single word, and normally maintains a stoic demeanor. However, despite these things, there are moments where his closed-off nature breaks down, and the viewer can clearly read into his emotions, culminating in some of the most powerful scenes in the entire series. When you see Henrik staring somberly at the now-dead tree planted by his late wife, you don't need words to communicate the crushing pain of that moment. This visual storytelling is ever-present throughout the entire series, and plays extremely well with the eloquently beautiful dialogue. And if that wasn't enough, Interface makes a lot of allusions to historic art pieces. Each allusion to a historic piece interweaves the original meanings found with these works and ties them in with the narrative threads of Interface to create a moment that comments both on the original work and on the themes that Interface is trying to convey. Windows are simultaneously a liberating and constraining force. On the one hand, they let you see into places that you shouldn't be able to see, but on the other hand, they're only a tiny glimpse into the outside world. The things beyond the edges of the window are completely inaccessible to the viewer, and they can only speculate about the wide world that they are merely given a taste of. Interface is one of the most beautiful windows on the internet. Through it, I soak in the tranquility of nature and the strange inhabitants of the world. But these are mere glimpses, specters even. I desperately wish I could tear down that window and explore it all, but I can't. There is nothing else like Interface, and I can't help but be enraptured, staring out that window and mentally exploring the world of ideas hinted at by this wondrous world.
Oh, well, good day, Shaggy. How's my favorite block of manchego cheese? Me? Well, I'm working on kind of working on a little video, but I'm kind of stuck, not really sure what I want to say. It's about this YouTuber I like, Gavin Weber. Have you heard of him before? He's a cheesemaker. I knew you'd heard about him. Not the biggest channel in the world, but I figured his videos were up your alley. He makes homemade cheese from scratch in his little Australian home kitchen. How do you make cheese? There's just a few main steps, really. You usually start with some whole milk on a stovetop, then as it heats, you add a mixture of different starter cultures and liquid rennet. As you heat that mixture up and let it rest at a specific temperature, the milk starts to separate into curd and whey. Then it's just a matter of cutting the curd up into pieces, separating the curd from the whey, and then pressing the cheese together into its final form. Yeah, it is kind of surprising that the same process can result in so many different kinds of cheese. Sometimes he strains the curd multiple times, keeps cooking it down. Sometimes he lets the curds recongeal and then cuts them again. Sometimes there's a milling process with cheese salt. Cheddaring's pretty interesting too. See, that's the problem though. I'm not really sure why I like the video so much. You know, cheese and I don't even get along that well. I have a minor intolerance to you. And I mean, he's been making the same videos for 10 years and they haven't really changed much. But maybe that's the point. Like, no matter what cheese he makes, it still has to be the same basic process. Cook, cut, and press. Exactly, you'd think it'd get boring, right? Like, I mean, I see this video, and I know what's going to happen. Like, it's just the smaller bits that change. And it's not like I'm planning to make my own homemade cheese, so I'm not using it as a guide. I just sort of watch. You know what's interesting about Gavin, though? Here's something I really respect about him. He posts just about everything he makes, even if it's a failure. Like, there are a few videos on his channel where he starts going through the same tutorial-esque spiel, you know, and then partway through, he'll explain that he made a mistake in the preparation process, and that the cheese probably won't turn out right. But usually, when he ends up tasting it, it turns out alright, if not what he intended. Like, Cheggy, if you were a cheesemaker and you were sharing your stuff online, would you show your failures? Yes, I know it's weird, you're a block of cheese, why would you make cheese? I get it. But like if I were a cheesemaker, I don't know if I could do that. I think I'm too much of a perfectionist for that. Like if I had my own cheese making channel, and I uploaded a video of me making manchego, no offense, the wheel you'd see in the final video would probably be the 7th or 8th. Maybe I got to the pressing on one of the scrapped wheels, on another maybe I didn't even cut the curd. And all that cheese may have, or probably would have tasted alright, but I can't settle for mediocrity when it's something I care about as much as Gavin seems to care about cheese. What does that mean? I guess it means I can't do what Gavin does. I guess you're right. Suppose we did just make a video. Guess I better go cut this curd and get it pressed.
When I was younger, I used to think the internet would lead to people becoming more alike. It seemed inevitable. After all, it was called the internet. It fostered an interconnectivity no other technology had before, and it was only growing bigger. In reality, I couldn't have been more wrong. We became islands. There are famous people you'll never know, big ideas you'll never hear, and loved works you'll never see. The monoculture is long gone. We tossed it by the roadside and sped off down the information superhighway, which is a phrase no one says anymore.
The internet is a series of tubes.
Thus ends the most overblown intro you'll ever hear from a bloke about to talk about pure ownage. Hello, I'm Snakera. Let's talk about some bygone but formative content. Pure Ownage was a mockumentary web series that ran from 2004 until 2008. It was created by Jeff Lepere and Jarrett Kale. I may have loved this show back in the day.
You might know me as like the owner.
And after a rewatch, I
like own all you noobs.
Well, I still like it, but the experience was an odd one. While the show is little talked about today, I think it's very important to the development of online entertainment. It showed the web was a viable way to put out an ongoing live-action series, made stars of its cast, got a television adaptation, and many of its elements eclipsed the show itself.
Boom! Headshot!
Boom. Headshot.
Nowadays, it's a period piece, a look at the perception of where games and their players were at in the mid-noughts, made to play to that audience by leaning on the absurdity of the image with fondness and parody. The show follows Jeremy. He is everything television and newspapers of the time imagined a gamer to be. He lives with his mother, has few friends, no job prospects, and spends all day playing games. His documentarian brother Kyle starts dragging him out the house mostly in the hopes he'll make an ass of himself. Having been raised on the internet, Jeremy's social graces are lacking. He speaks exclusively in slang that was ridiculous then and antiquated now. His worldview is competitive, not because he's cutthroat, but because to him, challenge is how you improve. Jeremy isn't easy to get along with, but he's incredibly honest to himself, and the only metric he judges people on is ability. The problem with that is he lacks the communication skills necessary to explain why he acts the way he does to people outside of his community. And that said, he is welcoming of anyone. He's just ignorant, over the top, and hard to understand. Still, over the course of the first season, Jeremy starts new friendships and rekindles old ones. Finds someone who likes his eccentricities. He mellows out and learns a little, but is still deeply ingrained in the reclusive but tight-knit gaming community of the time. One notable event is Jeremy playing at locals. His computer is sabotaged, but people are there to make sure he can still compete and ultimately win. The community is presented as supportive, helpful, and one where Jeremy's name carries weight. Before the show started, Jeremy's sole income was pawning off his winnings. The money wasn't good, but it also wasn't the point. For Jeremy, it's about competition, the love of the game, and the pursuit of being the best. And, there's an underground war between shadowy cabals of gamers who can shoot key blasts. I gotta say, even as a kid, I wasn't big on this. It was presented with a straight face, and yes, the joke is in its inherent silliness, but it always felt like I'd stopped watching Pure Ownage and switched over to the DirectX files. While the first season unearthed the character of Jeremy, the second is where it starts to develop and challenge him. The world was changing, and Jeremy had to change along with it. The cast is joined by Terrence Teabag Brown, an esports star who found fame and fortune in competitive Halo. While the two do become friends, he inspires some jealousy in Jeremy, since while they're both incredibly skilled, Teabag is everything Jeremy is not. He's outgoing, respected, and rich. He didn't have to reject a life outside of video games to be good at them. His success also irks Jeremy. Winning big at corporatized tournaments lacks the soul of picking up a few hundred playing whatever's going at locals. Teabag makes the argument that Jeremy has the skills to make a decent living in esports and has nothing to lose by really pursuing it. The show reluctantly sides with Teabag on this. There is nothing shallow about his success except in Jeremy's eyes. And this may all sound like Jeremy is being an arse in this friendship, and he is. But don't worry, it's good for him. He sees the world as a challenge, and now the challenge is for him to actually grow as a person and accept that times are a-changing. Gaming had hit the mainstream. The 360 era is where gaming went from a creepy joke to a socially acceptable pastime. Or well, it could at least start ping-ponging between the two depending on what day it is. The image of the basement dweller was joined by the dude bro, and even with the depth Jeremy had shown, he's a relic whose subculture no longer really fits him, even as a joke. So the show has to confront that fact. That shadowy gamer cabal is no longer presented as cool, but downright preposterous. As Jeremy's social life grows, he starts to tire of their petty conflicts. In some real juicy drama, Jeremy has a breakup and starts acting like how he sees Teabag because of it. which is to say he acts like a vainglorious cock. Teabag sees through this, but ultimately encourages him for a time since, well, it's funny. But eventually, it comes to a head. So Teabag tries to change tact with Jeremy, and while there is a bit more to this episode, this is the last meaningful event. The rest of the runtime is dedicated to skits and introduction of future plot elements. This is how the show ends. Teabag's actor tragically passed away in a car accident. The crew tried to work out how to carry on, but couldn't after such a loss. Jeremy ends on that boat. At least, in the web series. He ends adrift between the old perception of gaming and the new, his old character and wherever he was going, just before we all found our islands. In its time, Pure Ownage was a massive success. Nowadays there are more shows on the web pulling bigger numbers, but no show can ever talk to such a large part of a subculture in the same way. As the net gets bigger, messages will reach more people, but inevitably cover less ground. It can be hard to notice when the world is changing. It's often gradual, imperceptible, and now more than ever it's not a linear gradient, but communities and ideas separating, bubbling out into their own groups with uniquely held beliefs. Watching Pure Ownage felt like being shot back 15 years all at once into some sort of long ago point of convergence, when things felt less fragmented. Perhaps I just had a narrower view of the world then, but that's what it felt like. Pure Ownage was fun, but it belongs in the past. I wonder if a show can ever have its particular impact again. After all, the internet is proven now. It's a show that saw the end of an era coming, and it couldn't make it there. At least not in the same form.
In America, the cross-country trip has a significant cultural place. While sometimes it's just for the hell of it, there's the specific post-college version. After graduation, the young job seeker packs up their U-Haul and heads out west, an odyssey where one passes the threshold into proper adulthood. I finally got to do a trip like that, moving from Boston to Denver for my new job, and I found that I really liked traveling, seeing places I'd never been to before. Man, I should do this more, and I'll have a car for the first time and vacation days so I can just plan out some week-long trips and, well, I guess YouTube knew I had the wanderlust because it started serving me up some videos of a peculiar hobby, train hopping. There's a small sphere of people who like to record themselves packing up a bag and catching a grainer on the fly, with a surprising amount of tonal breadth among them. But there's one guy in particular I'd like you to meet.
Howdy. My name's Jim Stovey.
For your consideration, a brief taxonomy on the YouTube Hobo. On the one hand, you have adventure seekers, people who either frame themselves as a rebel to society, or others who just treat it like a big old expedition. With these, there's a real dramatic heft, an emphasis on evading law enforcement and strategizing on how to obtain supplies when they're running low. On the other, you have much more laid-back videos, placing more emphasis on the journey itself, often to the exclusion of the person making them actually appearing in the videos. They're just kind of like travelogues, but, illegal. Jim Stovey, through his channel, Stobe the Hobo, definitely fits in the latter. He doesn't focus so much on the suspense of boarding or running from the bull, and he often stops in small towns and cities to survey the surroundings. But he remains a central figure in his own work. It's not just his opining on the state of America.
And while certain guys and politicians may think they're going to bring this back and bring back the blue collar, this is done.
Or even the piano covers he performed to score his videos. He is just a weird character, but still often espouses enjoying the simple pleasures in life. Traveling the country, hanging out with friends, and grabbing a beer. Okay, like a lot of beer. While there are a number of train hoppers you could choose to watch, almost all of them feel like some person who's doing this in their spare time, as a weird hobby, Watching Stobe, though, you get the sense that this is just what he does. When he calls himself Stobe the Hobo, he's not pretending. Hoboism started as a way for workers to go from seasonal job to seasonal job, with trains allowing them to travel farther to seek employment. Maybe that particular form has died out, but people still need to pack up and move from city to city for their careers, ripping them from community ties they may have started building. It takes its toll. I should know. I did say this was a ballad, right? Through a brilliant use of ad revenue and Patreon, Stobe was in part able to turn train hopping into a job rather than a means to get to one, but it caught up with him. On November 8th, 2017, at the age of 33, Jim Stobe was killed by a train while hopping around Maryland. If you watch a lot of train hopping channels, you'll actually see him in other people's videos, taking trips with fellow riders. He seemed really knowledgeable and loved to share it, and on news of his death, the tributes from other channels came pouring in. Scroll down to the comments on any video he's in, and, without exception, you will be met with a flood of people eulogizing him. Stobe was not just involved with one of the weirdest communities on YouTube, he was its beating heart. So maybe crack open a steel reserve for Stobe sometime. May you ride forever, Jim.